This is 5 Live Formula One with Jack Nichols.
Hello and welcome to the Red Bull Ring in Austria. This is the 11th round of the Formula One World Championship of 2022, and we have got free practice 2 coming up for you now for an hour and then a 3-hour break, and then it'll be the sprint race this afternoon that will decide the grid for the Grand Prix tomorrow. The way it ended in qualifying yesterday evening was Max Verstappen on pole position, just ahead of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. Those three separated by less than a tenth of a second, and then it will be George Russell in 4th on the grid, Esteban Ocon in 5th, and we'll get stuck into the Sergio Perez stuff a little bit later on because there was plenty to look at after qualifying yesterday. But we've got this free practice 2 session coming up first of all, which you'll have a look at various race paces, and if qualifying pace is anything to go by, then it should be pretty tight. As ever, the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson is with me, and so for the next couple of days is Jamie Chadwick, the W Series champion, multiple W Series champion and Williams development driver. Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm very good. How are you?
Yeah, great, thank you. Looking forward to maybe not FP2 because it's one of the oddest sessions that we have in Formula One, but sprint race later. In fact, were you with us for the last sprint in Imola?
I was, yes.
You only come for the sprint races?
Yeah, it's a bit more interesting for me. I say that, I mean...
You're a sprint specialist, seemingly, this year.
I was about to say, I'm not entirely sure what they do in this FP2 session in terms of the run plans. I think they all, as we said, do slightly different running based on where they want to be, either in the sprint race or the main race. But yeah, I enjoy the sprint race. I find it's quite a good spectacle. It makes it a bit more interesting on a Friday as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it this weekend.
Absolutely. Andrew Benson, what are you expecting from this practice session?
Well, what I'm not expecting after just receiving a message from Mercedes is the Mercedes car's out at the start of the session. They're still repairing them. They say, well, we already knew earlier this morning that Hamilton's got a new chassis after yesterday. There was the biggest concern the biggest problem was the side impact structure. But in addition to that, they've both got different gearboxes from within their permitted pool, so no penalty. Floors and wings have been repaired and or swapped. Engines have been thoroughly checked and nothing replaced, but they're not ready to go out yet.
Okay, it was such a surprise yesterday to see both Mercedes in the barriers.
It was, and I'm still not entirely sure the reason why. I think Lewis, we rarely ever see make mistakes like that. So I think he even surprised himself, to be honest, the radio message afterwards. But the only thing I do know about the Mercedes, and particularly with George, is it can be very sensitive to wind. Or all Formula One cars are, but we saw that the wind was picking up throughout the session yesterday. And whether they just got unfortunate and unlucky with a gust of wind, I'm not so sure. But yeah, a lot of damage for that team, particularly on Lewis's side of the garage.
Yeah, absolutely. The session will be getting underway in 2 minutes' time. Sergio Perez, meanwhile, he qualified 5th on the grid yesterday, but he will start 13th because all of his Q3 lap times were deleted, and that's the way they sort of got around that yesterday.
He qualified 4th, didn't he?
Oh, he didn't he? Yes, sorry, ahead of Russell. I apologise. So it was qualified 4th, Sergio Perez, but he will start 13th on the grid because he exceeded track limits in the second part of qualifying, which was missed at the time, but then retroactively sorted out to a reasonable degree. A bit of a shame for Pierre Gasly that he wasn't able to make it into Q3 because he would have done, but nevertheless, Perez drops down the field. So it's going to be quite an interesting grid, actually, with Verstappen and Leclerc, Sainz, and then you've got Russell and Ocon and Magnussen, and Schumacher will be 7th on the grid, and then Alonso, Hamilton and Gasly. So it's already quite mixed up for the sprint.
Well, that Perez incident has caused a bit of consternation because people don't really understand what happened. Why didn't the stewards spot it? Why didn't they do something in Q2? Because we saw it.
Yeah.
You know, everyone seems to have seen him go off. He went off twice on the same lap, not just once. And it wasn't like a marginal call. So why did it take them so long to realise that had happened?
And also, if you're Sergio Perez, it's frustrating because you're getting away with it effectively. He knows he's doing it. Normally, I guess they're told where they're being policed with track limits. Maybe they overlooked that part of the track because rarely are people using that much road. He wouldn't have necessarily known that they were going to look at it, so he would have kept doing it in Q3 as well because he was doing it in Q2, and then suddenly finds out that all his lap times have been removed.
And there's actually a second stewarding stroke race directoring type thing going on at the moment. So do you remember Monaco, where Ferrari protested the Red Bulls after the race because
the exit of the pit lane.
They crossed the line at the exit of the pit lane. It turned out that the sporting code, which defines the pit lane and exit rules, had been changed over the winter to instead of any part of the car, it now said the wording was changed so you could go over it with part of your wheel. So and that's still in the rules now in the sporting code. But the race director's event notes that were published this morning have a new addition to them talking about the pit entry, which is obviously a big thing in Austria because it's so dangerous there because people are coming around a fast blind corner. And it says that any part of any tyre that goes over the white line when they're coming into the pits is not allowed.
So the rules are different pit entry to pit exit?
Well, no, the rules are different in the sporting code and the race director's event notes again after a situation 3 races ago where that led to a team protesting. So it's like, what's going on? And I haven't got an answer to what's going on yet, but it's just another example of things that are happening at the FIA that are leaving people going, what? So I'll just park that there, and if I get an answer, I haven't had an answer for an hour and a half and counting, so I'm not hugely hopeful, but let's see.
Well, no, but let us know if you do. Session is underway. We've got 58 minutes and 52, 51, 50 seconds left on the clock, and as Andrew said, both of the Mercedes cars are being worked on at the moment. Joe and Bottas are out on circuit in the Alfa Romeos. They've gone out on the mediums. Magnussen and Schumacher out on the mediums also. Norris, Vettel and Stroll have gone out on the soft tyre, and Leclerc and Sainz in the Ferraris have gone out on the medium tyres as they start to do some running. So we'll wait and see whether they're doing sort of full main race running or whether they're doing sprint race running and what exactly they decide to do, because they've got this hour to prepare for whichever. And it's actually going to be the sprint race is going to be quite, and this is sometimes the oddity I think with the sprint races, is when you get a mixed up qualifying, you then get the sprint race and it sort of sorts itself back out, so the grid for the Grand Prix is as it was. But if qualifying goes bad for you, like it did, not necessarily for Russell, because okay, he crashed but still managed to set a lap time, but for your Hamiltons and your Perez's, this is a big opportunity in the sprint to get back to where you sort of want to be for the Grand Prix.
Exactly, it's kind of a second bite at the cherry to get a better starting place in a grid order, and particularly with something like the Mercedes, which I think is seemingly quite strong here, but I think will have good race pace as well with the Red Bull. It's a nice opportunity to get yourself back in the mix, so all is not lost for them. Valtteri Bottas as well, starting at the back of the grid. He'll be grateful for the sprint race this weekend.
Absolutely. So Bottas and Joe across the line, and Bottas does a 1 minute 12.3, Magnussen does a 1 minute 12.6, and Joe does a 1 minute 12.8. Norris is improving on this lap at the moment too, on his first run on the soft tyres after what was a very difficult day for the McLaren team. Norris 15th on the grid, Ricciardo 16th on the grid ahead of the sprint later on. They'll be hoping to make a little bit of progress. Again, it's those who it favours to get back towards the front of the field. But it was I haven't actually looked this up, and maybe it's happened loads, but the top 3 on the grid within a tenth of a second feels very, I mean, obviously everyone is now screaming at me Jerez 97, where the top 3 on the grid were separated by nothing, but top 3 separated by less than a tenth is incredibly tight.
Very close. I mean, this track does promote very close lap times. It's only 10 corners. I say only 10 corners. They're still technical, but it does generally mean a tenth here. I heard Toto Wolff say a tenth here is like 2 tenths somewhere else. So I think that does promote it to be closer. Also, I think the lap that Max put in wasn't his best in the first 2 sectors, so maybe there's a bit more there to put it ultimately all together. But so cool to see. Yeah, obviously the 2 top teams very close, and I would have liked to have seen Merck in there as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Out of the garage now goes Max Verstappen, and he makes his way to the end of the pit lane and joins the circuit. 6 wins so far this year, 7 podiums. So he's only been on the podium once, not on the top step, which is quite remarkable. And in fact, I think that was his first race, wasn't it? Yeah, where he finished in the points, but not on the podium, where he finished not on the podium in Silverstone last time out. Verstappen, after he picked up that damage. He's up at turn 3 now. 20 degrees the air temperature in Austria, track temperature at 36, so still fairly cool conditions for the start of July in the Styrian Mountains, and Verstappen is weaving from left to right. Do you think that Leclerc needs to be aggressive in the sprint today? Do you think he needs to get ahead of... Is it sort of... He needs to make big gains, so he needs to find a way past Verstappen?
He does from a championship perspective, yes. From a race perspective, I think maybe not. It depends how Perez does. I think both Ferraris being in the top 3 over Red Bull, I think from a strategy point of view, can play into their hands. I think if they're clever, they can really use that to their advantage tomorrow. I think just in general, Leclerc's delivering, in my opinion, but just seems to be so unfortunate with the lucks that are falling his way. So I'm sure he just needs to keep his head down, and if they've got the pace in that Ferrari, he'll be in a very good position to win tomorrow.
He sounded very focused on the Grand Prix yesterday in his interview after the qualifying session. It's the Grand Prix that has the big points, obviously, and I think he'll be less concerned about finishing second. He'll be much more keen to finish second to Verstappen in the sprint to keep himself in the frame to potentially beat him in the Grand Prix than to do anything over ambitious in the sprint just for the sake of an extra couple of points in that, is my reading of what he said.
How difficult is it when things aren't going your way like they aren't for Leclerc, through kind of no fault of your own, to keep faith in what's going on around you? Because we had a big chat about this on I think it was Thursday on the preview podcast, and I'm interested in your thoughts on it, because it's all very well to say, oh yeah, I still have faith in the team, blah blah blah, but do you believe in him? It's
a really good point, because I think someone made a joke about confidence being the most used word in Formula One this year, because we always talk about it with, say, Ricciardo. He's not got confidence, and that's more in, say, his driving, what he's doing behind the wheel, but you still need confidence in all the other people around you, and whether it's your car or the team. And unfortunately, Leclerc will feel like he's being let down time and time again. He's of course made mistakes himself, but there's been a lot of stuff out of his control. I think the beauty of that is, to a degree, you can mentally just put it aside and keep focusing on doing your job, but it does weigh down on you, and he'll look at the championship standings and be frustrated that they do have a car capable of being at the top of the championship this year, in my opinion, and they haven't been able to convert that into anything meaningful so far.
Can he do anything about it? Or is that the problem? Because it's obviously not him that's running the Ferrari strategy department or the Ferrari reliability department. Do you have to just kind of ignore it?
It's quite tricky. I mean, you always hear Max and Lewis quite often question the strategy team on the radio, and quite often, then they can't see what the engineers can see, so they're not correct with what they're questioning. But rarely do you see Charles question decisions, and Monaco for me was the most frustrating, when Carlos clearly led the team to make sure they stayed out on the wet tyre and then go straight to the slicks rather than go into the intermediate in between. And it's little decisions like that that will make a big difference, and I'm not putting blame on to Charles in that sense, but I think you can lead the team as well from a driver's perspective.
You're absolutely right, but it's a really difficult balance, because you have to start from the default position that they know more than you. But the problem is that
that's the position I start every conversation in my life from.
Well, but of course, and they generally do know more than you, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to make the right decision. And as we talked about on the podcast on Thursday, the problem that Leclerc has with the Ferrari team at the moment is that they've got history of not making the right decision, and it's not just this year. It goes back through the Vettel era as well. We heard Vettel constantly questioning strategic calls made by the pits and overriding them in the way that Sainz does too. So Jamie, you're absolutely right that Leclerc should perhaps be thinking about doing that more, but the problem is, once you start down that road, it's hard to know how far do you go,
Chris Lord, thank you very much for this. So apparently Imola, it's happened loads recently. Imola 2021, Hamilton qualified in front of Perez and Verstappen by 0.087, and that's the closest in recent years. Russell, apparently when Russell was super sub, there was only 0.056 between the top three in Sakir. So there we go, it happens a lot. So shouldn't be that amazed. Across the line comes Verstappen. He does a 1 minute 9.067, which compared to basically a 1 minute 5 they were doing yesterday. So that's about 4 seconds off the pace, that, for Verstappen on the soft tyre. So that would suggest a longer run than a sprint run. I would anticipate. The Mercedes of George Russell is just getting lowered down now, and this will be his first run out after his accident yesterday. Pulls out of the pit lane, and we'll see whether they do an install or whether they then crack straight on with the running. And Stu G says these Saturday sprint practice sessions are a bit like the old warm-up sessions. Which is very true. That sort of, they just drive around and you don't... Did you know what they were doing in warm-up sessions back in the day, Andrew, on a Sunday morning?
People didn't tend to pay that much attention to
genuinely,
it. There was just some noise in the background, you know.
Honestly, like seriously, like.
Well, I wasn't doing radio commentary then, and
no, but you were being a journalist.
Yeah, but it was just like, they're doing a warm up now, you know. Let's go and talk to some people or whatever. Or...
So you're not doing long runs, or you're not.
I mean, people. I'm kind of.
I know, and it's
joking in a way.
And it's very funny.
People did. I mean, the difference then was that Parc Fermé didn't exist.
Right.
So you had the qualifying result, and it was what it was. But then the warm-up was the first chance to see what the actual race pace of the car was properly. And people didn't analyse practice sessions back then in the way that we do now, with long runs and everything. By the way, I'm missing these long runs now because you asked me a question. But anyway, I'm not quite sure how much validity there was to them anyway, but with Verstappen and the Ferraris on different tyres. But so from the warm-up gave you an opportunity to see who was actually genuinely quick in the race. So you'd often see, in the 80s, for example, when Prost was at McLaren, you would often get Prost qualifying like 5th or something behind Senna in a Lotus, and the Williams is in front of him. And then suddenly in the warm-up, bang, there's Prost quickest. And it was like here we go, it's another race where you're not going to notice Alain Prost for ages, and then suddenly the pit stops will come up, it'll be fastest lap, bang, Alain Prost wins the race. So they were useful and interesting in that. This is different because this is more opaque than the normal P2 because the P2 we know what they're doing. This we don't know which bit of which race they're simulating. Are they simulating the sprint? Are they simulating a first stint in the Grand Prix, a second stint in the Grand Prix? So it's really hard for us to understand. The teams know because they can cross-correlate fuel loads and the information that they're seeing from engine modes and something, so on, and acceleration rates out of corners and from the GPS, and etc. So they get a really clear picture. We don't have any of that, so we're just a bit stuffed, unfortunately, watching this practice. But we'll do our best.
Absolutely. So, but you used to go to the track for the warm-up.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Some didn't, I presume.
Some, as you know now, not all journalists have the same timetable as each other, and everyone has the prerogative to make their own calls, don't they?
47 minutes and 20 seconds to go. Verstappen is quickest for what it's worth on that 9.0. He's actually improving through the final couple of corners, so he might chip away at that and get into the 1-minute 8s. Here he comes across the line, and it is a 1-minute 8.966 for Verstappen, almost 2 tenths quicker than Carlos Sainz. 6 tenths from Verstappen to Leclerc in third, and then it's 1.1 seconds to Norris in fourth, Gasly fifth, Ricciardo, Perez, Albon, Tsunoda, Latifi, Schumacher, Bottas, Magnussen and Zhou, the top 14. Albon goes up to 7th quickest, and actually Alex Albon is going to be 11th on the grid for Williams later on this afternoon, which was pretty impressive, it felt, because it was in a completely dry, normal qualifying session.
It was, and they obviously brought quite big upgrades to Silverstone that never really got the opportunity to be shown, I guess, with the wet qualifying and then obviously not getting very far in the race. So, this is a good opportunity for Alex to see what he's capable of in that car. I think, 11th is a great starting position. They're generally pretty good at making the most of the situations when others, have issues, especially in sprint races. So, looking forward to seeing how they end up later.
Having said we're a bit stuffed analysing pace, we have got 2 Ferraris on the same medium tyre lapping very similar pace to each other. I can tell you that between the two of them, surprise, surprise, Leclerc is slightly quicker. It's less than a tenth on average, but he is slightly quicker than Sainz.
But Sainz's overall lap time has been quicker.
His fastest lap time is quicker, but in a race it's not the one lap that counts, is it?
No. Absolutely not. Gasly's on a reasonable lap at the moment. He's on the fastest first sector of anyone on a reasonable middle sector. Russell went out, did an install lap, came back in, and now that looks like it's all been checked over and he's back out on circuit, coming through the final couple of corners. So his first lap time is about to come on the board on the soft tyres across the line, and he goes up to 5th. Gasly then jumps ahead of him up to 4th, so Russell drops down to 6th in the end, but he's getting some running in. Very busy out there. Everybody's in quite a bit of a train.
I always think this is interesting, especially this year, because I swear they never used to do that. They used to find as much space as possible, even a little bit in the race simulations. They would try and back out and find their own space, but this year we've got a run of 4 cars, or this time we've got 4 cars in a row, all following quite closely. So I think that is part of the race simulation, to understand what the car is like in close proximity as well.
Well, Russell's just sent it to the inside of Magnussen at turn 3. Now Gasly's going around the outside of Magnussen at turn 4. So they're all having a nice little squabble out there.
If I had to guess, by the way, I would say that the people on soft tyres might be simulating the sprint, because I think they might well be keen to do the softs for the sprint, because it's the sort of distance that softs should be able to do. Whereas the people on mediums might be simulating right now the first stint of a Grand Prix, which would be more likely to be a medium start, I would suggest, followed by whatever tyre choice they go to next, depending on how long they can make that medium go. That would be my guess.
Okay, 44 minutes on the clock. Verstappen is now back in the pits, having done 9 laps on the soft tyre. Then the Ferraris are still lapping out there. Gasly's on the mediums too, and then the rest of that gang from 5th through 11th are on the soft tyre.
What's going on with the engine?
We think it's the Mode X strategy, and if you want we can box and pass through for traffic.
Okay, Leclerc saying what's going on with the engine. Didn't fully understand the answer, honestly, but we can also drive through the pits if we want to get out of this traffic, because he is still in he's in behind George Russell now, just ahead of a McLaren as well. Russell's moving out of the way, so Leclerc has a little bit more clear air as he comes through 6 and then down into 7, where Hamilton went off yesterday. Still no movement from the Alpines. Alonso, Ocon are still in the pit lane, which presumably is out of choice. Hamilton is out of necessity because they're still repairing his Mercedes after his accident yesterday. Leclerc comes through the final corner, and it's a 1 minute 10.7, but again, I guess these lap times are getting quite muddied because of the traffic as well, because it was a 1 minute 14 for Sainz on that last lap, so he was 5 seconds off the pace he had been going on. In fact, I think he might have come into the pits, and that's probably why. So he's come through the pits and is back out. He was second in the sprint at Imola, and is second on the grid today. And I think he got Verstappen off the line, didn't he? And then Verstappen closed him back down and passed him. Is that correct? No, that feels incorrect now. I'm saying it out loud. No, that was correct. Verstappen was on pole for the sprint, and then Leclerc got him off the line, and Verstappen passed him towards the end of the race, so he had pole position for the Grand Prix as well. Russell's improving on this lap, so is Nicholas Latifi in the Williams. Latifi comes through the final corner, out across the line, and he's currently 11th, and he remains 11th, but takes a tenth or two out of his previous best lap time. George Russell is going quicker than anyone has been so far in the middle sector, so he's pushing on the soft tyres. They're only 6 laps old, so he's done sort of half the running of everybody else out there, with 41 minutes and 40 seconds on the clock. Leclerc across the line to go 1.3 seconds slower than Verstappen, so that a lap in the low 1 minute 10s, so he's lost quite a bit of lap time, I would suggest, and that looked like a trafficless lap, broadly speaking, for Charles Leclerc. So interesting that the Alpines have decided not to go out. They obviously don't think there's too much to learn just yet.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by that. Also, Aston Martin took a while to go out as well. Yeah, it's interesting. I think I broadly remember the last time there was a sprint race, George Russell was quickest in the FP2 session, and it looked like they were almost doing 1 lap pace to try and see the 1 lap capability of the car, which I don't know if they're doing something similar today, focusing less on the long run pace. But yeah, he's just put in a lap to put in P3 and only 2 tenths off.
You're absolutely correct.
That's good knowledge. That's really good knowledge.
Did you?
Super anorak.
Had you prepped that coming in?
No, I just broadly remember last time we were doing this exact thing, having no idea what it's on the radio.
The the overtake button is not working. Exit turn 1.
But we haven't seen the overtake press at 1. Can try it again.
I pressed it about 4 times, and then it started to work.
Looked like he worked this time around.
Negative, I pressed it many times before it started to work.
So Russell complaining that the overtake button not working. The team saying, well, it doesn't look like you pressed it. Well, I have pressed it. And then it did work with 40 minutes on the clock. So, yeah, interesting that. And that it's a similar story here. Although, to be fair, here, Mercedes are much more actually on the pace than they were at Imola.
I think that was the big disappointment about Hamilton, particularly yesterday. He genuinely looked like he was going to be in one, probably not pole, but certainly one of the first 3 positions. I think he would have beaten Perez and maybe would have got in the mix with the Ferraris. He certainly thought so. His pace suggested that. So for him to, as James said earlier, a very uncharacteristic mistake. He hates making mistakes at the best of times, but yesterday it would have hurt particularly because, as he put it, I think Russell, one of them said that it sounded like this. It looked to them like this was possibly their most competitive showing of the season in terms of absolute pace, which they were. Which, first of all, is great for them, but also was a surprise because they didn't think they'd be as competitive in Austria as they were in Silverstone.
Yeah, no, a real frustration for the Mercedes team. Carlos Sainz has just had a little lock-up on the right front on the medium tyres. Looks like he didn't flat spot it too badly. Oh, actually, it was quite big at the start.
Rolled off the brakes quite nicely to sort of damage limitation there, but yeah, that will still cause a little bit of pain for him for the rest of this run.
Verstappen is in the pits after 9 laps still. Russell has returned to the pits after 7 laps on those soft tyres. Well, 6 really, because one was an install, but Sainz and Leclerc are still going around on the mediums. The Alpines look like they are about to head out. Both Ocon and Alonso are at the wheel with 38 minutes to go, with Oscar Piastri standing at the back of the garage watching them get ready to head out. And we'll see what the Alpines do when they head out in a couple of moments' time, because it's a good starting position for Esteban Ocon, 5th on the grid in the Alpine. Was there anything particular with Alonso yesterday?
Yeah, he broke his floor on his very first lap of Q3, so I think he thought he could have been 5th or 6th as well. But after doing that, he couldn't go quicker.
He's had good pace all weekend, really.
He's had good pace for a while, Alonso, hasn't he?
Yeah.
He's been looking very strong. Unfortunately, that car is not very reliable, which they don't seem to be getting that much criticism for. I guess they've not got their engine in a Red Bull anymore.
But what do you mean? He's finished in the points the last 5 Grand Prix.
Well, Ocon broke down with an engine problem in Silverstone.
True.
Didn't Alonso have a problem with his engine in Canada, which is why he dropped back from qualifying 2nd on the grid? So that's the last 2 races.
Yeah. Then
didn't one of them break down in Baku as well? I'm pretty sure they did.
Not fully. They both got the points.
Okay,
both got in the points.
Anyway, there's been a lot of reliability problems for sure.
It's reliability problems across the board. Who would you say is is Mercedes the most reliable?
Well, the Honda in the Red Bull is reliable, not in the AlphaTauri, and the Mercedes is reliable. Mercedes have lost engine performance comparatively compared to last year. Some people think that the Mercedes might be as much as 0.3 down in terms of outright performance on one lap, and I think this is, I haven't delved into this in any detail, but I suspect that one of the reasons why Mercedes are more competitive in races than they are in qualifying is that because of that,
right,
they're losing relative engine performance.
No more party modes in qualifying to turn up a notch.
Interesting. 36 minutes remaining. Verstappen quickest, Sainz 2nd, Russell 3rd still. Then Leclerc 4th, Gasly 5th. Albon up into 6th, ahead of Norris and Ricciardo. Stroll 9th, Tsunoda 10th. Perez, Latifi, Vettel, Schumacher, Bottas the top 15. And then Magnussen and Zhou are the 2 other drivers to have set lap times at the moment. A lot of the cars coming back into the pits now. The Ferrari's still going. We're just having a look at Charles Leclerc coming up into turn 3, and he has sent it in very deep indeed, and he's gone out over the runoff area on the exit of the right-hander at turn 3. So lots of laps coming in here for Ferrari on the mediums. Just getting a replay now of Sainz coming into the first corner, and he catches that right front again. Nothing too dramatic, but, well, they're getting a lot of laps in here, Ferrari.
This is why I think they're simulating the first stint of the Grand Prix. You know, it's like, how far can the medium go? But I don't know that, but obviously, but that's what it feels like.
Yeah, and about 4 seconds off the pace at the start of a Grand Prix.
It's normally much more than that. It's normally like 7, 8.
Yeah.
Sometimes even more than that if there's a particular time management race. But so even on a short track like this, 4 sounds. That's the thing that's against what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's a little bit quick in some ways, I would argue. But
fuel load, though, perhaps they're not quite as heavy as they will be at the start of the race. But it's not a particularly abrasive track at all. The track surface is very smooth. So, yeah, in terms of tyre degradation, I'd imagine they can push that medium quite far, to be honest.
Have you raced? Was it in W Series?
Last year.
Yeah. Like it?
Yeah, I do. I think it does promote good. You have to be technically very good. There's not much to it, so fine margins make a big difference, like we saw in qualifying yesterday. It's kind of a lap of 2 halves. There's sort of the big braking zones, big stops, and then a little bit more high speed in the last sector. It's nice. I think racing wise it will be good to watch, especially with the DRS zones. 3 DRS zones should at least promote some good overtaking.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how the racing is, because historically it's not actually been very good, broadly speaking, and people think it's going to be good, and then it kind of isn't. But with the sort of bigger DRS impact and the sort of slipstreaming impact and stuff, maybe it'll be a bit better this season as the cars come back into the pits, especially with those 3, and with the cars able to follow more closely through sort of 6 and 7 and then 9 and 10. I think that'll be the kind of the key areas, because you could never be close enough out of 10, basically.
For me, that went so unnoticed at Silverstone as well. Obviously, we all spoke about how great the racing was, but not many people spoke about how closely they were following through Maggotts and Beckett's. 3-4 cars in a row able to actually be within sort of a car length, and rarely have we seen that in recent times. So I think you're right. This weekend, it'll be interesting to see that sort of last sector, whether they can actually hang on to the back of each other and get into a proper DRS zone to overtake.
Silverstone's just and Hamilton said this, didn't he, in his post-race interview with Jenny, and he was just saying, why does no one listen to me that Silverstone is just the best racing track in the world? And I'm always amazed that it seems to be so far clear of any other track, because the nature of the corners and whatever, and it's just remarkable.
I think it's not just the nature of the corners, it's also the track surface. So
really?
One of the things that the Silverstone track surface doesn't do is overheat the tyres as much as others. So a Pirelli doesn't behave like a Pirelli.
Because it's not very abrasive?
Yeah. Well, it is abrasive in one way, in the sense that it puts lots of lateral load in the tyres because of the high-speed corners.
Yeah.
But it's not. It doesn't have the same impact on the surface temperature of the tyre or the overall temperature of the tyre as lots of other tracks do. So they're not restrained in the same way. Jamie's nodding sagely here, suggesting she's agreeing with me. It's allowing the drivers can keep pushing on the tyre pretty much all the time without having to worry about it overheating, which is not normal by any means.
No. Bang on. I think also the nature of the circuit is it's not sort of loading one side of the car sort of time and time again. If you look at Barcelona, the left-hand side of the car or the left tyres get a pummeling, whereas Silverstone's quite nice. There's good gaps on the straight to kind of give the tyres time to recover, and then into quite often change direction, so that helps, and it does seem like they can actually properly push in the race, which is nice to watch.
And you're right, we've seen some of the best racing ever, haven't we, in the last few years. Remember back to Leclerc and Verstappen in 2019 for the first stint. That was
even Hamilton and Verstappen before they obviously crashed. The lap before was tremendous. In fact, the first were there 2 starts in I can't remember. But they did it a bit, didn't they? The side by side stuff, and it's just, and the way the corners flow into each other,
It was the sprint followed by the Grand Prix.
That was it, correct. So it happened in the sprint in the opening laps, and then it happened again in the Grand Prix. Verstappen is about to improve his lap time as he comes across the line. Maybe he's not. He does a 1 minute 9.0, so within a tenth of a second of what he managed previously. He did the fastest middle sector of anyone, but he is now out on the medium tyre, Verstappen. So that's interesting that he's doing very similar lap times on the medium tyre. Maybe they've not put any more fuel in the car potentially after his initial 6 or 7 laps or so, but as Andrew said earlier on, so difficult to really read anything into this session and into these lap times because everybody is doing their own thing and not necessarily running on the same run plan, as the Ferraris are now heading out on the soft tyres. So the first half of the session for Ferrari set on the mediums, and now they are going out on the softs, whereas Red Bull are kind of doing the opposite, really, with Verstappen now out on the mediums and Sergio Perez out on the mediums too. He does a personal best in the first sector, but still a bit slower than Verstappen has managed in Sector 1 as he comes down now towards Turn 4. And Perez is going to be one to watch coming through the field today, I think.
Definitely. Like we said, it's an opportunity now to get back in the mix for the main race, and yeah, he's fortunate to have that in a sense. He showed good pace yesterday, not the pace of Max. He's been much closer in qualifying recently than he was yesterday. Even with his track limits excursions, it didn't gain him as much as he needed, but still, the performance of that Red Bull, especially in the race, is going to be significantly faster than those around him.
Yeah, he'll be trying to carve through and get as good a qualifying or as good a grid position as he can for the Grand Prix tomorrow afternoon. Comes out onto the start-finish straight, goes 5th quickest. Fernando Alonso has gone 4th quickest in the Alpine. He's now, it says he's on the medium tyre, but his lap time, according to the screens, says that he was on the soft tyre when he set that quick lap. So he's done 4 laps on the soft tyre and then stuck on a medium and is heading out there. So that's interesting. Verstappen is improving again. Zhou goes up into 8th place. Here comes Verstappen out of the final corner now on the medium tyre, and he does a 1 minute 8.799, so he goes slightly quicker again on the mediums. Russell is right up behind someone as he comes out of the final corner. George Russell. It is Sebastian Vettel in the Aston Martin, and he's got the DRS open on the run up towards the first corner. Little nose to the inside, but sits in behind the Aston Martin. Vettel, the slowest qualifier yesterday.
Just have no grip, sliding around a lot.
Copy.
No grip and sliding around a lot, says Russell. Not ideal.
Not ideal. He's just gone down the inside of Sebastian Vettel there. Again, I can't really make of what they're doing run plan-wise. He's obviously on the mediums now, consecutive push laps, so possibly simulating what they hope to see in the race if they're going to start on the softs. But yeah, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, he's out on the medium tyre. Hamilton is still in the pits because they still haven't been able to repair that car in time, Lewis Hamilton, with 27 minutes to go. So he'll be hoping to get some running at least, and starting inside the top 10, he too definitely has the capability of making some progress over the course of the sprint later on, even though they are pretty short. Alonso improves on his medium tyre to do a 1 minute 9.081, so he is, I mean, that's just silly, this session, isn't it? Because I got nothing to say about Alonso's lap time, because you're like, oh, that's quite impressive, is it? Maybe?
We've just got is it? We don't know, do we? I mean, I'm pointing at the screen because we've got another one of those ridiculous Amazon graphics which is saying car performance rankings on the straights. It's got the Ferraris 1st and 2nd and Verstappen 5th.
Losing
which is
4
just
tenths.
not true. You know, it's like I've seen the telemetry from yesterday, and Verstappen is faster on the straights than the Ferraris.
I did see that they put a graphic up a little bit earlier saying that the Ferraris have logged a quicker straight line speed in this session, which may be true. Well, they might have pinged open a DRS, or they might have done whatever.
So what was interesting yesterday about the straight line speed comparison actually is it did look from the telemetry as if Ferrari have taken some wing off. They've got a new lower downforce rear wing that Leclerc first used in Canada, and which they both used in Silverstone, because they recognised that their their sort of drag stroke downforce levels were hindering them in the races. You know, they were qualifying on pole all the time and then just getting passed by the rebels in the race when they weren't messing up the strategy or blowing their engine up. So they brought this new wing, and it does seem that they're running it in a relatively low downforce spec here, because the telemetry yesterday showed they were basically matching the Red Bull all the way down the straight until just before the end, when the pace dropped off, which suggests that the engine was probably clipping at that point, so running out of hybrid energy, rather than because it was like it just suddenly tailed off,
plateaued almost.
Yeah, well, it was going up like this, and then sort of jinked down, whereas the Red Bull just kept going.
Yeah. I think that really worked for the radio.
Yeah, exactly. I did say jink down. So they are matching the Red Bull on the straights up to a point, but they're not quicker on the straight by 3/10 or whatever that graphic suggested that they were.
So apparently on that graphic, well, I don't know if he wants me to say his name, so let me know if you do. But he said apparently that graphic also had Hamilton in 4th.
And he's not been running. He's in the pits, yeah.
So there we go. Valtteri Bottas has won 2 of the 4 F1 sprints held so far.
He ain't going to win this one.
No, probably not. Esteban Ocon's gone second quickest. Leclerc now goes fastest. On the soft tyre, a 1 minute 8.660, so just over a tenth quicker than Max Verstappen. Ocon is third, Alonso is fourth, Sainz is fifth, Perez, Russell, Norris, Zhou and Gasly the top 10, Albon, Ricciardo, Magnussen, Stroll, Latifi the top 15, Tsunoda, Vettel, Schumacher and Bottas the 19 drivers. So Bottas actually doing a very slow run at the moment. His best lap time is a 1 minute 11.4, and his teammate Zhou has done a 1 minute 9.6. Oh, okay, he says yes I do. It was Matt Q from Autosport that pointed out the other inconsistency potentially in the AWS graphics. 23 minutes and 20 seconds on the clock.
Bottas is just starting his lap now, so I think, he's now starting to ramp up the speed. It'd be interesting to see what they do. A lot of people improving. Ocon's time on the medium tyre is impressive. Again, I don't really know what that means, but he's only a tenth off Leclerc on the soft, and on the same tenth as Verstappen on like-for-like tyres.
And quicker than Alonso when you were his teammate at Alpine, so you would suggest that maybe they are running a similar run plan, considering they were both in the pits and came out at the same point and have done the same amount of laps. So reasonable lap, as you say, from Ocon. Sainz has just improved to do a 1 minute 9.1, half a second slower than his teammate Leclerc managed on that previous lap. Perez then in 6th out on the medium tyres. Zhou has returned to the pit lane. Latifi has just jumped up into 14th place after he had a good weekend in Silverstone. Latifi
did, yes, really good in qualifying, especially because he didn't get the upgrades that Alex had. So definitely made a better situation of the wet conditions in qualifying. Got into Q3. I think that must be his first Q3 appearance. Unfortunately wasn't able to hold on to points, but he needs this turn of not just fortune but just momentum, I think, to try and get a bit more onto terms with Alex.
Absolutely. They're still working on Lewis Hamilton's car. It looks as though the engine cover's going on. There's still plenty of work going on in the cockpit and at the front of the car as well. And now Hamilton actually is suited and booted now, helmet on, ready to get out on track. And there is a curfew basically for the mechanics. So that's why they can't just work overnight and fix the car. They have to wait until they're allowed to come into the paddock basically in order to fix it this morning. So that's why it's taking a little bit of time and a little bit longer than they would have thought. Fernando Alonso is going quickly on this lap as he comes through the middle sector. He's got a bit of traffic ahead of him in the form of Mick Schumacher's Haas. Flashes through the right-hander of turn 8. Now up over the hill and then down the other side into turn 9. And Alonso maybe is going to go to the top of the times here. It's going to be close between he and Charles Leclerc. Out through the final corner, gets a bit of a tow from Schumacher as he comes across the line, and it is third quickest for Fernando Alonso. So he gets back ahead of his teammate Esteban Ocon, and he is within 2 tenths of Charles Leclerc, and he is 16 thousandths quicker than his teammate Ocon. Hamilton is now in the car, just lowered himself into the cockpit. There are still mechanics underneath the car doing some bits and bobs, and the engine cover isn't fully back on yet. But there's quite a few bits of the car that aren't quite on yet, but Hamilton is going to get maybe a little less than 20 minutes of running as they attach the front wing now to the Mercedes. And Russell, though, has got 19 laps under his belt, so I can't imagine this is actually going to be too much of a disadvantage for Hamilton.
Important to get some running, though.
Yeah.
Especially after the damage that was sustained yesterday. New chassis, just more for a systems check than anything else. It's a shakedown, as we would call it. Make sure everything's okay so that he can go out in the sprint race and have full confidence in what he's got. So that's important they get him out. Obviously, no rush in terms of, probably any meaningful running, but important to get a few laps under his belt, I'm sure.
So, Benson, you've got some numbers. We're not playing this, not jingle worthy, but you have some numbers.
Yes, some. So we've got Leclerc currently running on the soft, which is what Verstappen did earlier. And remember, we were suggesting that maybe Verstappen was simulating the sprint start, the sprint stint there. Anyway, excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat this weekend. Verstappen's average on the soft tyre was 9.118, 1 minute 9.118. Leclerc's currently averaging 1 minute 9.230, so they do look pretty comparable, I would suggest. What don't look comparable is Verstappen's times on the medium compared to the Ferrari's times on the medium. So Verstappen's currently averaging 1 minute 8.9, which is obviously that's faster than the times on the soft, which you would expect over a long run. Whereas the Ferraris were averaging 1 minute 9.9. So they're not a second slower than the Red Bull.
No.
They might be a bit slower than the Red Bull, but they're not a second slower. So I don't think we can compare those two. But those soft times do suggest that they are running at a similar pace, which is what we'd expect. That's what they've been doing all year. So it's not exactly woo, is it? But but you wanted some information, and there it is.
Are you saying that to me or the listener?
Everyone.
Science has actually just gone quickest.
I want to make you happy, Jack.
At 1 minute 8.610, you often do, and it's one of my frustrations actually with F1 is all of this analysing data, and I know it's good, but you end up just going into the race. It's not too bad now but certainly in the Mercedes domination era, you'd look at all the timings from free practice 2, and you could just say what was going to happen in the race, and then it would happen. And then we'd be surprised we found the race a bit boring. Because you knew exactly what was going to happen. You knew that Hamilton had a 2/10 advantage over Bottas, and they had a 4/10 lap advantage over, so they'd probably win by 15 seconds, and then they did.
Well, not everyone likes the sprint weekend, but if you're bothered about that, that's one thing that the sprint weekend does resolve, because we're not going into the race this afternoon knowing what the relative pace of the cars is, whereas usually at a normal Grand Prix weekend, as you say, we do. Not that what we find out from the race simulation runs on Friday is particularly shocking ever, because it basically suggests that Red Bull and Ferrari are really close.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, they end up going into the race and they are really close, and the Red Bull normally wins.
Sometimes I don't know why we do it sometimes. When you're commentating on some of these, you're like, why are we just giving away the result of the race?
Well, it is kind of like our job.
I know it is, but you know what I mean. It's like you don't get it with any. I don't think you get it with any. Do you get it with any? You are a sports fan, Andrew Benson. Do you get it with any other sport where you know so clearly what's going to happen come the actual event?
Well, Usain Bolt, the producers just said in my ear, you pretty much knew then, didn't you?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
And Manchester City at the moment in the Premier League, you pretty much know what's going to happen there.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think Formula One is unique as a sport, because what we get all engrossed in practice. It's 2 days of build-up for a Grand Prix on Sunday. We're basically watching a football team train in practice. That's what it is. It's not competition on any level. But we have enough information to be able to extrapolate a competition aspect out of it. It isn't, because you don't know the engine modes, you don't know what they're doing with the tyres, you don't know the fuel loads, etc., etc. It's like watching Pep Guardiola go and put his team through a load of drills, isn't it? or play a practice match.
But then
no other sport in terms of journalism and commentary does that.
But then what you have is Man City will then go up against a team on the Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock, and then competition ensues, and you don't quite get that in the same way in Formula One, because the pace that Ferrari have is still what they do in the race. It's just whether that's quicker or slower than the Red Bull. There's not that kind of direct competition almost that can affect your own get. There is sometimes. Well, you see what I'm saying?
It is. I do. It's a direct competition, but I think the random element is removed by the involvement of machinery. You know, the machinery has a performance level. If you're maximising your machinery's performance level, that's how fast you're going to go. Whereas a football team has more of a direct impact on the performance of its opposition. Do you see what I mean? And a tennis player as well.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, if you play a great shot, even Novak Djokovic isn't going to get it back. Whereas if you do your fastest lap you possibly can in an Alfa Romeo, you're never going to go as fast as Verstappen in a Red Bull, are you? So it's a sport, but it's a sport that works in a slightly different way from other sports.
Sounds a bit boring, doesn't it? I love it. I love it though, and I don't know why sometimes. Do you ever get that?
Again, Jamie's nodding sagely, but not really saying anything.
I'm not sure I've got anything to add. But I do agree. You've worded it really well in the sense we don't watch Man City train, so we don't know what they're doing behind the scenes, and you see them turn up on the day and things can be unpredictable for that reason, and they can either turn up and play their best football or not, and I think that's the unusual thing that we have with our sport. But still, I think this year for me has been the most in recent years unpredictable in terms of the racing, especially Lewis's kind of out of nowhere race pace that just seems to be the fastest on track from, like I said, nowhere.
I think early days it is, but I think we're beginning to see a new pattern beginning to emerge this year. From this point of this year, I mean. I think, the first part of the year was very much Red Bull and Ferrari miles ahead of everybody else. And usually Ferrari were quickest in qualifying, and usually Red Bull won the race either because they were quicker or because Ferrari messed it up. And Mercedes were way off the pace. I think, I could be wrong, but it's beginning to look like Mercedes have made a decisive step forward. And they are finally finding a way to make that car quick. And I think it's only a guess at the moment, but it's based on the evidence of 2 races. I think we're going to see a new pattern where Mercedes are increasingly in the mix as the season goes on. And if they are, that's going to really change the dynamic of the championship, because it's no longer just going to be as straightforward as Ferrari have to beat Verstappen all the time or they're stuffed. Because if the Mercedes is in there mixing things up, then the point swings each race could potentially be much bigger than they are when it's just 2 teams going for it.
And the next few Grand Prix are at quite standard circuits as well.
So Paul Ricard is a track that Mercedes fancy their chances at, because it's smooth, quick corners mainly, or medium and high-speed corners. Not too much slow stuff, hardly any bumps at all. It's like a billiard table, isn't it, Paul Ricard?
Maybe Hungary.
They're a bit nervous about Hungary because it's bumpy and slow. Spa, they could be really good at. Again, it's smooth and quick corners. The problem for them there is that it's very power sensitive, and their engine they're down on the engine a bit, and the same for Monza. But and then Singapore, goodness me, they could be in trouble, but they could be really quick in Suzuka. And so it's and also their car's performance level isn't necessarily going to be the same, because just because it's difficult and struggling on the bumps right now, as they begin to get on top of it, maybe it'll become less so.
11 minutes and 20 seconds on the clock. Hamilton is getting some laps in now. He has gone 9th quickest on the soft tyres, just over a 10th slower than his teammate George Russell. Russell is 7th fastest, Hamilton 9th fastest as he comes across the line, and then down now towards turn 4 with 11 minutes and 0 seconds on the clock. So the order is Sainz quickest, he's just returned to the pits. Leclerc 2nd, Verstappen 3rd on the medium tyre, Alonso 4th, 5th for Ocon, 6th for Perez, 7th Russell, 8th Bottas, 9th Hamilton, 10th Norris, Stroll, Gasly, Vettel, Zhou and Albon are the top 15. Then Schumacher, Ricciardo, Magnussen, Tsunoda and Latifi, the 20 drivers at the moment. Lando Norris is just coming up towards the right-hander of turn 3 at the top of the hill. A bit more encouraging, the pace in this session for Norris, only 9/10 away from Sainz. Again, difficult to read too much into it, but he's ahead of Stroll and Gasly and Vettel and Zhou. It's not particularly thrilling stuff, but the Haas is actually down in 16th and 18th places, so they're obviously doing something a little bit different with 10 minutes to go. But we've discussed Ricciardo's problems quite a lot, but it's been such a roller coaster for McLaren this year, hasn't it? Because their trajectory over the last few years has been great. Terrible in Bahrain after their sort of pre-season problems, and then they're just sort of up and down a bit, really.
A weird one as well. Similar to the Mercedes kind of chat initially, it just seems like that they don't know why or the reasons. This is not a direct fix to their problems they're having. Yesterday was the first time I've heard Lando Norris talk about braking being a limitation for him. I know Ricciardo struggles with that in comparison to Lando, and where he's felt that he's lost performance comparative to his teammate. But Lando, I've rarely heard speaking about that. So a track like this, that's going to cause them big problems. But also coming up, if braking is a problem for them, places like Monza, Spa, it's not going to be so nice.
No, absolutely. He said he was scared to touch the brakes yesterday, did Norris during the qualifying session. George Russell has just done a sort of install lap, I imagine, or on the hard tyre, and I'm pretty sure it's the first time I've seen anyone on the hard tyre all weekend. I can't remember anybody going out on the hard tyre so far this weekend. Well, I guess that's probably true, isn't it? Because they wouldn't have run it in. Well, we've only had qualifying and an FP1, so.
Also, they've only got 2 hards, haven't they? And they like to save them for the race.
Just be taking the tops off those for the race if they are to put them on.
Russell then back in the pit lane. Sainz and Leclerc still lapping, getting a lot of running in here. 38 laps now for Charles Leclerc. They have done the most laps of anybody out there as Sainz comes across the line to check off his 37th lap of the session. Leclerc's on his way back out again, so an awful lot of running coming in for the Ferrari team. And as we've seen over the last few races or the course of the season so far, race pace is one of their biggest issues, or race pace / tyre life, so they're getting their plenty of laps in here. Leclerc through the final corner, out across the line, and that is lap 39 completed for Charles Leclerc. And that was an out lap as well as he comes up towards the first corner, and he's been on these soft tyres now for 21 laps. So are we thinking softs all around for the sprint?
Looks a bit like it, doesn't it? One of the things Leclerc said yesterday was that he wanted to spend this session working out how to drive the car in the best way to make the tyres operate well. So he's obviously putting a lot of effort into that, and it all that sort of dovetails with his, what he was saying about wanting to have a clean race and maximise his performance. So he's very aware that he needs to get the maximum he can, and it looks like that's what he's been doing. As you say, 37 laps for Sainz, 39 for Leclerc. They're spending this session understanding exactly what they need to do to maximise that car in the race.
Danius has emailed saying, earlier in the broadcast of FP2, Andrew Benson said, we're a bit stuffed with trying to understand what the teams are doing because of all the detail and the data. Previously, Andrew has said he's avoided talking to the AWS stats people. Assuming that they're seeking feedback in areas to improve, it strikes me this is an area they could potentially help. The AWS people could help you with all your stats and data that you want.
I'm not sure I trust their data, is what I'm saying.
If we want to actually, talking about wanting to make it more unpredictable, maybe that's a good way to do it. Go with the AWS data. promote that, and then the opposite will happen in the race.
I like it. Charles Leclerc's just had quite a big slide actually on the exit of turn 9.
Yeah, I think I did quite a big mistake. I think I was on the onboard, so you probably saw it.
Big slide.
Nice save though.
Back end going as he came through the downhill right-hander of turn 9 on the exit, corrected and went off the circuit. Hamilton's just been off the circuit at turn 1 and carried on, and Leclerc is now coming back into the pits. So what, 23 laps on those soft tyres before Leclerc returns to the pit lane with just over 5 minutes left in the session. Sainz, Leclerc, Verstappen, Alonso and Ocon the top 5, and they are all back in the pit lane now. Perez is still lapping on the medium tyres in the Red Bull. Bottas is back in the pits. Russell is still out there on the softs. Hamilton's still out there on the mediums. Norris is 10th and back in the pits. Stroll, Gasly and Vettel out on circuit as well on the soft tyre, as is Yuki Tsunoda. But everybody else is back in the pit lane with less than 5 minutes to go. Alonso is still sitting at the wheel of his Alpine, so maybe they're going to head out just at the end of the session. But it's just looking close again between Ferrari and Red Bull. What have you made, Jamie, of Ferrari's sort of? What do you think they should do with regards to sort of the team orders and the backing Leclerc and stuff like that? Because it was interesting, I thought, listening to Sainz yesterday after qualifying. He said, "Yep, I'm on the clean side of the grid. You know, I should be able to kind of go for it and get ahead of Leclerc," is kind of the inference. There's no team orders there at all at Ferrari currently.
I don't think they should put team orders in this early. I understand why. I thought the call at Silverstone was a bit unnecessary, particularly under safety car. Can't ask Carlos to leave a gap. That seemed unnecessary. I think if there's a quicker driver in the race, they shouldn't fight. They shouldn't lose track position to anyone else for that reason. But at this point, they're still reasonably close in the championship. Carlos hasn't done anything to not give himself a worthy opportunity. He shouldn't be in that number 2 seat already, in my opinion. I understand why. Leclerc's been very unlucky. All things going well, he probably should be a lot higher up in the championship and particularly on points. But still, I think they should be allowed to race for themselves at this point without it coming to the detriment of the team. But they
cost themselves what, 13 points? So in the race at Silverstone, right? If they pit Leclerc instead of Sainz, or they swap Leclerc and Sainz, then suddenly instead of 43 points behind Verstappen, they're 30 points behind Verstappen. That's a big chunk, isn't it?
They lost that race by not pitting Leclerc. They probably could have still stacked them and probably still got a 1-2 out of it. So I think they lost that on strategy, not because Carlos then drove for himself out front. So yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one, but yeah, I think they need to be better in the pits, to be honest.
Exit on turn 10, last lap, I might have lost a piece. Understood.
And Vettel did. Something came off the floor, I think, of Sebastian Vettel's car. Was it the floor? Oh, yes, somewhere under there. Maybe even the bottom of the front wing there. I'm not quite sure where that came off for Vettel, but something came off. Yeah, it's certainly difficult, but it's tough though, isn't it, when Ferrari are going up against a one-man team, you know, where they're fully backing Verstappen at every opportunity.
Exactly, and yeah, it's not easy in that sense. But that said, I think they've got a very strong driver pairing, Ferrari. Between Carlos and Leclerc, they need to be fighting with each other, or not with each other, but they need to be fighting for the team to get ultimately the best results. And we even questioned it with Perez when he had sort of a bit of a turn and a bit of run of results. We asked ourselves whether Red Bull would have to change their approach, and I think they were open-minded to that. The team have to do the best for the team, regardless of which driver is ahead. They need to do the best for the team, and if Carlos happens to be ahead, they still need to get the best result out of that for the team's championship.
Bethany says, an unseasonably cool day in Austria due to all the shade that BBC F1 are throwing at AWS, which is quite amusing. A minute and 10 seconds to go. Back into the pits comes the Red Bull of Perez. Verstappen's just heading out onto the circuit. 1 minute to go. So the order is going to to end as it is currently, with Sainz quickest and Leclerc second, Verstappen third, Alonso fourth, Ocon fifth. Then Perez, Russell, Bottas, Hamilton, Norris the top 10, Stroll, Gasly, Vettel, Zhou and Albon the top 15, and then Schumacher, Ricciardo, Magnussen, Tsunoda and Latifi the 20 drivers. Cameron says, loving a bit of gravelly Benson. Can we have this more often?
Well, given the reason why I'm gravelly, we could probably arrange that, but I'm not sure I want to go there. We best not go into that, had we?
No, maybe not. 20 seconds on the clock, but I'm glad you're all enjoying this particular brand of Benson that we have this weekend. Cars slowing down, coming through the final couple of corners as they want to, I think, try and take the checkered flag, basically, so they don't have to do another couple of laps. Pierre Gasly going very slowly out over the start-finish straight in order to take the checkered flag. Same is true of Fernando Alonso. Checkered flag is out. The sprint race gets underway in 3 hours' time, so that's when we will be back with you. In 2 hours and 55 minutes we'll be back with you, but the sprint race gets underway in 3 hours, which will decide the grid for the Grand Prix tomorrow afternoon, and it's going to be a really interesting fight between Verstappen and Leclerc. And as we've discussed, it's where you play the long game, really. As Andrew was saying, Leclerc sounds like he's very much focused on the Grand Prix tomorrow.
Exactly, but we'll see. They'll be into turn one. They're going around now to do practice starts, so I think the start's going to be key. It's so close by the looks of things, even from what we could make of that session in the slightly longer run. So it's probably actually going to be quite hard to pass with it being so close. So the start's going to be key, and then the long game ahead of tomorrow with strategy, and I think that's where Ferrari are in a good position with both their drivers in the top three. Yeah, and that's very true, and it's something we've spoken about a lot over the last few years, when a Red Bull or a Mercedes sort of can outnumber the driver they were with, but in the past they've never been able to. Bottas hasn't quite been there in the race, or Albon and Gasly weren't quite there in the race, whereas with Ferrari you get the feeling that Sainz can be there and can be a sort of problem for Verstappen a bit more than other teammates have been in the past. Exactly, you can force their hand strategy-wise, and that's where the pit wall of Ferrari are going to have to be on it, both later today and tomorrow. Tomorrow, depending on where they're starting, if they can hopefully not have Perez make so much progress in the race today, then they need to use that advantage, to make the difference. Absolutely.
Andrew Benson, then, your thoughts from this session?
It's close, isn't it? I think Ferrari against Red Bull. Mercedes, I don't want to extrapolate anything from the lap times, because I don't think we can. I think we know what the pattern of the sprint's going to be. It's going to be.
Do you think Leclerc needs to win the sprint and start on pole?
I think he needs to do absolutely everything he can to recover his season. Actually, I've been thinking. I don't think probably not got much time left to get into this in detail.
But 2.5 minutes.
If you think about, I was thinking about 2010.
Okay.
Remember the 2010?
Wow.
British Grand Prix. Fernando Alonso ends it 47 points behind the championship lead, and he came out after the race and said, "I can still win the championship." And do you know what? He very nearly did. In fact, he would have done if Ferrari hadn't balls up strategy. Again, a bit of a recurring theme here.
Yeah.
So all is not lost by any stretch of the imagination. I think I'm okay with that.
You think you're okay?
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
And but the problem for them is that Red Bull is such a formidable rival. There were 5 drivers going for the championship in 2010. There's only really 2 this year, although Carlos Sainz would obviously disagree with me on that one.
Perez is second in the championship.
Yeah, but he's not in the battle for the championship, is he? He's just there to protect Verstappen. So it's really difficult task for him. He's got to start clawing back. Every opportunity he gets to get ground back on Verstappen, he's got to take it.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Incident involving Alonso reviewed, no further investigation, driving unnecessarily slowly. Classic Alonso. And that presumably was...
Say that to his face.
Yeah.
How dare you?
I try not to say anything to his face. He's a very scary man, I think.
He's not scary.
Do you not think?
No, he's really nice.
I find it's a bit intimidating, isn't he?
He is intimidating, but below the surface, there's the public Alonso. There's like a front to Fernando Alonso. He has a public presentation. Just get behind that. He's a different person.
Okay. Well, that is the end of Free Practice 2. We will be back for the sprint race later on this afternoon. It's going to be starting in 3 hours' time. It may be on BBC Radio 5 Live, depending on when the Women's Wimbledon final finishes. If it finishes early and it's over in 2 sets, then we'll be on 5 Live for it. But if not, you can listen to us on the BBC Sport website or wherever you usually listen. We will be getting underway, as I say, at 3:25 UK time. The sprint gets underway at 3:30, and then we'll be back with you for a podcast later on this evening. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live. For what it's worth, end of Free Practice 2. Carlos Sainz is quickest, Leclerc second, Verstappen third, but it will be Verstappen on pole for the sprint race later on this afternoon. We'll see you then.